She texted me, "I need to explore other options," the night before our trip. So I canceled everything, froze her cards, changed the locks, and months later, karma made her beg to come back. The message came on a quiet Thursday night, a moment so ordinary it almost felt unfair for something so life-changing to happen then. I was standing by the sink, rinsing the last of the dishes, when my phone buzzed beside me. The screen lit up against the dim kitchen light, a simple blue bubble holding words that would split my life into a before and after. Asterisk, I need to explore other options. Asterisk, there was no greeting, no explanation, no warmth. Just that cold sentence hanging on the screen like a receipt left behind after a transaction. My hand froze under the running water, the sound of it suddenly filling the apartment in a way that felt too loud, like the room was trying to hold its breath. We had been together for 3 years. I was 31, she was 29. We got engaged the previous spring after a relationship that had grown slowly, naturally, not the kind fueled by chaos or grand gestures, but one built on quiet evenings, shared meals, and the small comfort of routine. Our apartment in Hoboken was small but ours, decorated with 2 shelves of green plants and a narrow living room that always smelled like coffee. We had tickets booked for a weekend trip to New Jersey, a visit to her family, dinner at our favorite Italian spot, and lazy packing on Saturday. Just another simple ritual that meant more than it looked. I stared at that message until the words stopped making sense. Then I called. Voicemail. I called again. This time she answered on the 3rd ring, her voice calm in a way that made my knees weak. She said she needed space, that she didn't want to hurt me, that she wasn't sure about moving forward. Her words sounded practiced, polite, rehearsed. At dinner earlier that night, she had kept her phone face down on the table, her attention flickering between me and a group chat that seemed to mean more. It was a small thing, but it stuck. I remembered the way she'd played with her fork, the slight hesitation when I'd asked about work, the way she'd said she was just tired. Every moment replayed like a movie I'd seen too late to change. At midnight, I drove to her place because sitting still felt impossible. When she opened the door, her hair was tied half up, her face flushed, her hoodie hanging loose. She looked like someone who had already packed emotionally. She said I shouldn't have shown up. I told her you don't end an engagement over text. She looked down, mumbled about needing time, and I realized she wasn't asking for time. She was asking for permission to leave without guilt. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I made decisions. First, I canceled our flight. A few clicks, 2 refund confirmations, each email landing in my inbox like a small door closing. Then I froze our joint credit card. 1 swipe in the banking app and her access was gone. Finally, I drove home, used the landlord's code, and changed the locks. It wasn't rage. It was control, quiet, steady, and absolute. I dropped the spare key into a trash bag, looked once at the framed photo of us on the boardwalk, and walked down the stairs. The photo looked smaller than I remembered, like a memory shrinking to fit inside reality. An hour later, my phone rang. It was her. The background noise told me she was at the airport. Voices, suitcases, announcements. "They won't let me board," she said. "Please." Then, after a beat, her voice cracked into a whisper. "You're cruel." I didn't respond. I just let the silence hang there before hanging up. I walked to the river, sat on a bench, watched the fairy lights reflect on the water, and typed 1 line into my laptop. I will not beg. It wasn't a statement of pride. It was survival. But that morning, something in me shifted. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I was done. I forced a calm smile and said, "Okay, take your time." She seemed shocked, like she expected me to beg her to stay, to cry or argue. Instead, I just took a sip of my coffee. "If you need space to figure things out," I told her, "then you should have it." Her face lit up in relief. She thanked me, hugged me, said she'd stay with her friend Heather for a while. I just nodded, knowing Heather wasn't the one she'd be staying with. That afternoon, she packed a small bag, a few outfits, makeup, her laptop, and kissed my cheek before walking out the door. I waited 30 seconds after the door closed before picking up my phone. I called my old friend Doug, who happened to be a divorce lawyer. When he answered, I said calmly, "I need to file for divorce. How soon can we start?" Doug was silent for a moment before asking, "She finally said it, didn't she?" I replied, "She said she needed a break. I'm giving her one, permanently." By Monday morning, I had every financial document ready, bank statements, house papers, retirement accounts. I slept peacefully that night for the first time in months. When Doug filed the papers on Tuesday, I requested that the sheriff serve them directly to Claire at the address she was staying, which, thanks to our shared location app, I knew wasn't Heather's place but some guy named Gregory's house across town. When the papers were served, Doug called to tell me that Gregory himself answered the door before Claire came out, shocked, barefoot, her face pale. "She's been served," Doug said. The look on her face was priceless. I didn't feel joy, just a deep, calm satisfaction. She'd wanted space to discover herself. I'd just given her the freedom she asked for legally. When Claire finally turned her phone back on and saw the divorce papers in her hands, the illusion she had so carefully built around herself started to crumble. She called me over 20 times that night, texted another 15, her messages swinging wildly between anger, denial, and desperation. "Nathan, what is this? Why did you do this? This isn't what I wanted. I just needed time." Then another text came, "You're being cruel. How could you file for divorce without talking to me?" I read every word without reply. The woman who wanted freedom now seemed terrified of what freedom actually looked like. 3 days later, she showed up at the house. I saw her through the doorbell camera, standing there with puffy eyes and her hair pulled back like she hadn't slept. She tried her key, but it didn't work. I changed the locks the night after she left. She rang the bell repeatedly until I opened the door, leaving the chain hooked. "Nathan, let me in," she said, her voice cracking. "This is my house too." I looked her straight in the eye and said calmly, "Technically, it was our house, but you moved out when you decided you needed a break. You can't have both." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please, can we just talk?" she whispered. "I made a mistake." I shook my head. "Talk to my lawyer, Claire. He handles everything now." She begged for 5 minutes, just to explain herself. I could see the realization setting in that she'd miscalculated everything. She thought she could have the excitement of a new romance without losing the safety of the old one. But that's not how life works. She wanted a break. I just made it official. Weeks passed and the legal process began. She tried everything, calling my friends, reaching out to my family, claiming she'd been misunderstood. Even her mother called me, asking me to be reasonable and give Claire another chance. But I was done. You don't get to rip a heart apart and then ask to stitch it back together when your new fantasy fails. I'd given her 10 years of loyalty, stability, and love. She repaid it with secrets and lies. When the temporary court hearing happened, she tried to convince the judge that she deserved financial support because I had locked her out. Her lawyer claimed she was struggling and needed help paying rent. What he forgot to mention was that the rent was at her affair partner's house. When the judge asked Claire to confirm where she was living, she stammered. "With a friend," she said. "Name?" the judge asked. "Gregory Winters." The judge looked up from her papers, raising an eyebrow. "Is Mr. Winters a romantic partner?" Claire tried to lie, but her voice cracked. The judge leaned back in her chair and said coldly, "So you're asking your husband to subsidize the home you share with another man?" That was the end of that argument. Outside the courtroom, she waited for me. Her eyes were red, her voice shaky. "Nathan, please. I never slept with him. I just needed someone to talk to." I looked at her, feeling nothing but exhaustion. "Then you should have talked to me," I said, and walked away. That moment, I realized there was no version of this story where I'd be the villain. She'd written her own ending long before I filed the papers. Months passed. The house was sold, the assets split, the divorce finalized. I signed the papers without hesitation. 10 years of marriage ended in 10 minutes. When the judge said, "You're officially divorced," I felt lighter than I had in years. I moved into a new apartment, clean, simple, quiet, a place that was entirely mine. Then, 3 months later, out of nowhere, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey Nathan, it's Claire. I know I shouldn't be reaching out, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I was selfish, and I lost the best thing I ever had." I read it twice, then deleted it without reply. I didn't need to respond. She got the break she wanted, and I got the freedom I deserved. Weeks turned into months, and the silence between us grew louder than any argument we'd ever had. Claire's social media, once filled with pictures of dinners, trips, and her newfound freedom, slowly faded into quiet posts about self-reflection and healing. People didn't know the truth, that she'd traded stability for a fantasy that fell apart faster than she could fix it. Her new relationship didn't last long. From what mutual friends told me, the man she left me for was never serious. Once he realized she had nothing left to offer but regret, he moved on to someone else. The woman who once thought she deserved more than what I could give was now struggling to pay rent, searching for a job she'd quit years ago because she didn't need to work. Life has a way of humbling people who think they're untouchable, and watching it happen from a distance wasn't satisfaction, it was closure. There were nights I sat alone in my new apartment, thinking about the 10 years we'd spent together. The vacations, the holidays, the quiet nights watching movies on the couch. I remembered the way she used to laugh, the way she'd fall asleep with her head on my shoulder. I won't lie, those memories hurt, but they also reminded me that I had loved fully and honestly. I had given everything I had, and she chose to throw it away. There was a time I wondered if I could have done something different. Maybe worked harder, paid more attention, or been more romantic. But eventually, I realized you can't fix a relationship alone. You can't be the only one fighting for a marriage while the other person is already planning their exit. That realization freed me more than the divorce ever could. A year later, I ran into Claire unexpectedly at a friend's gathering. She looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Tired eyes, forced smile, trying to pretend everything was fine. When our eyes met, she froze for a second before forcing a smile. "Nathan," she said softly, "you look happy." I nodded politely. "I am," I replied. There was no anger left, no bitterness, just peace. She looked down, her eyes filling with the kind of regret that words couldn't cover. "I miss what we had," she whispered. "You were always good to me." I smiled slightly and said, "You just realized that too late." Then I walked away, leaving her standing there in silence. It was the last time we ever spoke. That night, as I drove home, I realized that closure doesn't come when someone apologizes. It comes when you stop needing them to. Now, years later, I've built a life I'm proud of. I found someone who values loyalty, who doesn't play games with love, who understands that forever isn't just a word. It's a choice you make every day. Claire became a lesson, not a loss. And though the memories still exist, they no longer carry pain, only wisdom. I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say isn't, "I forgive you" or "I miss you," but simply, "I'm done." Because when you finally let go of what's breaking you, you make space for what can heal you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every ending isn't a tragedy. Sometimes, it's the beginning of the life you were always meant to live.